Good morning and welcome. I'm Daphne Richards, Travis County Horticulture Agent with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Thank you for joining us for this webinar in our Drought to Deluge Gardening Series. We have a great program lined up for you today: Homeowner Landscaping Plans, Design and Construction. As part of this program, our presenter may refer to various source material or websites. Don't panic if you don't catch those in time to write them down. All registrants will receive a follow-up email chock full of good stuff, including a link to the recorded session and links to any references or resources listed. Our presenter today is Sandy Stone. Sandy is a graduate of the University of Texas with a Bachelor of Science in Interior Design and a Master's in Architecture. As a partner with Heimseth Architects, she specializes in historic preservation. Sandy has lived and gardened in Austin for over 50 years and has been a Travis County Master Gardener since 2019. Sandy uses her skills to create unique garden spaces and is proud to report that she's learned to work with what she has in each circumstance to create gardens that will survive sometimes harsh conditions of Central Texas. When we were installing a new unirrigated section of xeric plants in our demonstration garden at the Travis County Extension Office, Sandy's expertise and design eye were indispensable, and I'm excited to share her expertise with you today. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature to type them in, and we'll answer them as time allows. Sandy, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Daphne. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Well, welcome everyone. It's really great to be back today, and I hope that some of y'all are returning from last week, and if you're new to this time, welcome. Today we're going to be looking at, well, let's talk about what we did last week just a little bit. We did site documentation and site analysis last week, which are the basis for design, so that you can get the best design that you possibly could have for your special site. This week, we're going to be talking about design itself. And design is the process of determining the overall theme and concept of your garden. We're going to build on the information we gathered last week and go through the process of how to implement your design. We're going to use established strategies to create a cohesive design by using basic principles of design. And I'm going to go through those with you pretty much in depth. We'll document your design. I'll show you the process of how you do that and help with material selections and plantings to support your design concept. And then the second half of the program, we're going to talk about implementation and construction. So we'll determine what portion of the project will be phase one. We may design the whole garden area for your entire site. We may just do one area, but we're going to walk through the process of how do you determine what you can do in your first phase. We'll talk about gathering tools and materials for hardscaping and irrigation. If you need equipment rental, the process of doing that. Gathering soil, compost, mulch, and plants for your project. Then we're also going to talk about demolition of anything that's in the way of your design. You know, plants that need to be removed, any structures that are in the way, we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about installing your hardscaping and how the process of doing that and irrigation. And then the process of installing soil and plants. So landscape design is the process of creating an overall theme or concept for your garden. This is where you begin to develop your personal garden. For me, it's a garden that should reflect the gardener that creates it. As you'll see, as we go through this presentation, the garden is a very unique site. This garden is a very unique site and is a reflection of the people that live there. My hope is that each of you can create a garden that is unique to you. Setting overall goals and objectives. Your garden should create a sense of place. A garden in Central Texas is going to be very different from a garden in New England. The questions, so synthesizing the gathered information during site documentation, the questions that I asked you during the last session right at the end were, about looking at how other gardens and photos to get an idea of what you really want, and how you can incorporate some of those things into your landscape. Can you blend different styles that you like into your garden and create a cohesive design? And the answer to that is yes, you can. It just has to be done with a lot of thought. And then coordinating the style of the garden with your house. And then also we talked about what your must-haves are. Things that you really want to have in your garden. And then we're going to discuss basic garden concepts and design. So these aren't hard and fast rules, but they help create a garden that is comfortable to experience and pleasing to the eye. And these design principles are balance, rhythm and repetition, scale, proportion, consistency and harmony, emphasis and simplicity. So the first one is balance. If a project is in balance, it feels stable and is aesthetically pleasing. And I'm showing you the picture of the Texas State Capitol because it really shows symmetrical balance, or formal balance, which has a central axis, which is the dome, and this axis of trees that goes down the center of the site. And it has identical elements on each side of the axis. So you see that it has large trees within the site. Symmetrical design is structured and stately, and it's very direct. The paths are normally pretty straight or, simple curves. It can be direct and it can be very rigid. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes it can be, and it's stable and calm. It creates a sense of peace when you look at it. Some of the other examples of this type of garden are like the Texas Governor's Mansion is also, it's very often used with larger buildings that are more institutional. So like the courtyard at the University of Texas in front of the main building is a very symmetrical composition, and allows, and as I said, creates a sense of, okay, I know where I'm going. Very, very pleasing and calm. And then the other type of design, balance in design, is called asymmetrical balance, and it occurs when you have unequal visual elements on each side of the composition, but they're still balanced. And I think of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center as a perfect example of this. This is the photo of the front entry to the garden, and you'll see that on one side you have these large, massive stone columns that form the aqueduct, and it draws you towards the entrance archway into the main garden. And that is balanced on the other side by the pond, a large open field that's often full of wildflowers, and then mature trees a little further away. And these landscapes sort of invoke nature. They're more natural and flowing, and it invokes a feeling of movement and draws you forward. These can be exciting, and they can also be very peaceful and calm. It just depends on how it's done. I talked about balance in the last two slides is the overall concept of a garden. So it's kind of a macro scale, but balance is used all the way down to the little bitty details of a garden. you want to look at every portion of your garden and determine, if it's balanced. And you do this with plant sizes. For example, this photo at the right, at the left, you have this rainwater urn, and it's surrounded by plants. And it is this. If this plant was a small plant that didn't have as much presence as it does, it would get lost in this composition. So it's balanced in that the plant works with the and offsets the urn, but it also can hold its own. And this is a balanced composition. You have this beautiful arched bridge in the background, and the repetition of that kind of shape with these plants here. It builds from very small plants to very large in the back. So as you're looking at this view, your eye gets pulled back, but it's a very peaceful, calm, and quiet kind of composition. Plant textures are another way that you can create balance by the way that you use different textures of plants together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about color, using balance with using color to help with balance. This is a color wheel, and there are all kinds of versions of this, but I wanted to use this one because it's pretty simple and gives you a really nice, um, very easy to read composition. So complementary colors are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So for example, red and green are complementary colors. Violet and yellow are complementary colors. Blue and orange are complementary colors, and so on around the color wheel. The primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, and that's designated by this triangle. And every other color on the color wheel can be made from these three colors. And then the secondary colors are orange, green, and violet, which is a secondary triangle that are showing here. And the other colors, which are the tertiary colors that are in between all of these, are combinations of the primary and the secondary colors. So they're blended together to create these colors. And then you have neutral colors, which are shades of these colors that go out into the more grade scale, which are not shown on this color wheel, but they're made up of all of these colors, and they create a neutral color or background color. And I added this slide here because I wanted to show you, this is actually a secondary color scheme. You have the violet in the cactus on the gate, the green gate, and then this orange wall. But these colors are much more muted than what you see here. So that's something to be aware of as you're designing for your garden. This is a secondary color scheme, but it's much more subtle than what you're seeing on this color wheel. So there are color schemes that are used in the garden. This is a monochromatic color scheme. It's one shade of color or one basic color with an accent. These are both green color schemes, which is typically the color that you're going to have in a garden. And you can see that even though this is very calm and serene and peaceful in both of these photographs, there's lots of interest here, and there's lots of shade. We have the really yellow greens all the way to the deep, dark, almost black greens around it. And they're around this neutral kind of off-white statue. And there's also texture within the leaves. There's lots of variety. So it's not boring at all. It's something that just draws you in. And same with this one. It's a different, you have the base of the neutral colors around the lake, and then the different greens that sort of pull your eye back, but it creates a very restful scene. And then the group of colors that, these are warm colors. Reds, yellows, and oranges are considered warm colors, and they come forward. They really draw your eye. They can be focal points. They create a sense of excitement and an interest. And if you use them in mass, they create a lot of intensity. Um, in if you've ever seen a field of red poppies, it's pretty incredible and very striking. And then these are the cool colors, blue, green, and violet. And these colors recede. They create a sense of peace and calm, and they can be used in mass, like these blue bonnets that we see along our roadside sides every spring. They create a great visual impact and just a real sense of peace. And you can use these colors, as you can see in this photograph here. There's lots of blues and greens, which are very calm and peaceful, but they have the intensity, and the blue pot, but there's the intensity that's been added by using this really bright pink fuchsia color in the bougainvillea in the center of that photo. Neutral colors. These are kind of the basic color palette and the foundation of most garden plans. They tend to fade into the background, and they set a stage for accent plants or items. These have to be used, I think, to offset the intensity of the warm colors in particular. You want to use more of this than you would more of the warm colors in most cases. That's not always true, but sometimes. So now we're going to move on to, that was balance and color, and then we're going to move on to rhythm and repetition. And rhythm and repetition are created by repetition of line, form, color, and texture. And these are very similar. Repetition very often will create rhythm. So as you can see in the background of this photo, the trees in the back all are the same shape. So there's repetition of that shape, but that repetition creates a rhythm that draws your eye and pulls it. That is also reflected in the water of the pond. You can see here. And, we have the same thing going on here with these little round bushes in front. They're varying sizes, but it's a repetition of that shape, including one in the foreground that pulls your eye forward. So this creates a visual link from one area to another. And you can do this by using similar plant shapes, similar shaped boulders, similar colors, leaf sizes. There's all kinds of ways to do this. Proportion and scale are dependent on size and relationship between different elements. I talked about this photo a little bit earlier, but this plant is very, the correct scale to sort of balance this larger ornamental urn. If you look, what I do when I'm doing proportion and scale, it's really kind of hard to describe it. So when I'm setting things in the garden and thinking, okay, this is where I want to put this, what needs to go next to it, and I set things down and where I think they need to go, and then I adjust them as I go to make sure that I've got the proportion and scale correct, because that's really important in the garden. This photograph I wanted to show you because this bridge is pretty large. It's in a public garden, and but it is the focal point of this garden. Everything sort of revolves around it, and it creates a scale for this garden If there was a person standing here, it would be very clear that this is a walking bridge. It's not not a bridge for vehicles. Um, and one of the things you'll notice in this photograph is that this is a really large space, and they have not used many large plants. What they have done is create smaller masses of individual plants to balance the heaviness of this. Consistency and harmony, consistent use of materials and geometric shapes. I think there's really not a whole lot that needs to be said about these two photographs. This garden demonstrates it in so many ways. The consistent use of materials, the consistent use of color, the consistent use of repetition of plants. And throughout this entire garden, everything is white. All the flowers are white. And it just creates a very peaceful, harmonious garden that draws you in. And emphasis. Without emphasis, your design can be monotonous. So creating a focal point that creates drama and interest and pulls you forward. So if you look at this slide here, you're standing in one garden. This was taken at the Denver Botanic Gardens. You're standing in one garden here, and you're seeing a view through to another garden, a very formal garden through this window. And it's just inviting and calling you to come forward and go explore that garden as well, by creating this focal point. If there was nothing there, you would just see, oh, that's a nice garden there. But this really kind of hides it, and you get peeks through it. So you get to think about, oh, what's over there? And I really want to see that. This one is the same way. It's created this beautiful, serene landscape, but it's created this kind of exciting, fun to walk on bridge that takes you up to this kind of half hidden stairway that draws you forward and makes you want to see what's on the other side of that. So emphasis is really important in a garden, I think, to make it be a fun place to be and want to explore. And simplicity. This is a suggested use of limited palette of materials to create unity. If you have a small garden, this is really important to keep your materials that you're using similar. In my garden here, I had an abundance of limestone boulders that I have used in various gardens throughout the site that I've developed over the years. And that has created a consistency within the garden because I wanted to create the unity of these are spaces carved out of the existing native landscape, excuse me, so that the nature kind of blends into the garden and the garden blends into nature. You know, that use of the limestone, the leaving of all of the big trees, and creating the garden so that it looks natural. If I had used cut limestone or bricks or any kind of pavers or anything like that, this garden would have a very different feel from the way it looks because I've used these limestone boulders. Pick 2 or 3 colors. I don't know if you can see on your screens, but in the background, you can see these blues, different blue pots. There's a blue pot here. And I've used blue pots throughout the entire garden over the whole site to sort of tie those gardens together and make them, to remind you, oh yeah, I'm still in this same garden. It's just a different area of it. Anyway. So other design considerations, those are the basic principles that we just covered. The other design considerations are your site entry. And this is really important, especially for residential sites. There's a ceremonial entrance that's from the curb to the front door, and it's the walk that you create. And it's really important that even if you can't see the front door from the street, which is true in the garden that I'm going to be showing you today, it needs to signal, this is the way you go. This is the path to the front door. And this one's very clear because this is an opening in a stone wall, and you just walk through it and follow the path to get to the front door. It signals visitors where to go. And depending on how you do this, it can create a warm, welcoming feeling and pulling someone forward, or it can discourage entry. And that totally depends on what you want. You also need to consider, for most residential sites, is the driveway entrance and the back door. Do you want to do anything special there? Do you want to have a clear demarcation between the ceremonial entrance and the driveway? And you also want to think about ease of connection between the inside and outside of your space. So another really important area is when you get to the front door. So you want to provide a clear indication of where the entry is by creating a clear path and making it special. And you also want to create a transition from exterior to interior. In this case, we had this porch that's red, a kind of a red stained concrete, and it's not a large porch, so I wanted to do something that would tie it to the inside. So the door is painted a deeper red, and then the floor on the inside is the same color of concrete. It's a smooth concrete. This is a rough finish, but the interior is the same color of red concrete that's here on the outside. And I also want to talk here about the garden, the style that works with your house. If you have a bungalow, you're going to have a different kind of garden than if you have a stately manor house or a ranch style house. It may be a different kind of garden. For this house that I'm showing you in this photograph, it's really kind of a whimsical design. It really doesn't fall into any category. And so the garden that I created for it has a lot of whimsy in it as well to help tie it to the house. The house acts as the backdrop for the rest of this garden, and I'll discuss that more later as we go on. And then we need to talk a little bit about hardscaping, what you want to use. So use materials that work with your house and with your site. This garden is in Denver, Colorado, and they have a lot of red sandstone there. I really recommend using the native stone that we have here, because it's here, it's accessible, it's easy to use. We also have brick factories here, so there are lots of opportunities to get pavers and bricks that are made from the local clay in this area. There are different ways to use the pavers and bricks. They can be a solid surface, as you can see here in the foreground of this photo. These are set solid with just joints between them, and these were probably filled with sand. They're not mortared together. And then there's this little stacked drywall step, and then you have a path of pavers that goes here, and they're a little more open and it looks like they have mulch between them. One of the things that you want to do when you're considering the filler materials to use between pavers is the materials what material you use, because if you have any kind of slope, those materials will wash out and you'll have to replace them. Also, you want to consider minimizing impervious cover so that you can keep runoff to a minimum. So using open pathways that have just stepping stones in them with gravel or mulch or decomposed granite around them will allow moisture to soak into the soil and not run off into other areas. You also want to consider screening and privacy. And you don't have to have a solid fence. This is just a freestanding gate, kind of a portal from one area of the garden to the other. And the wall is created by planting between the two areas of the garden. So it creates privacy and designates an area of the garden, but it's not a solid wall. Here we have a solid wall that steps up a slope. So there are many books and many examples of different kind of fencing and screening, and it all depends on what you want for your site, what you use. So I encourage you to do lots of looking at photographs and looking at fences that you like and screening that you like. Another aspect that you want to think about is changing slope or changing elevation. Is it okay to have a slope area, or do you need a retaining wall? If it's just a small change in elevation, you can use a dry stack stone wall, and those are fairly easy to build and pretty easy for most people to be able to build themselves. But if you have a higher retaining wall that needs to be mortared, then I really recommend that you need to make sure that it's properly designed and installed. So I really recommend you hire a professional to do something that's, say, over 3 to 4 feet tall. You're going to want someone who knows what they're doing. One of the things about mortared retaining walls is that you have to have drainage holes in them, because when we have the deluges that we have here with the rainfall, water builds up behind those, and they can actually push a retaining wall over. So it's really important that they be built properly. So now we're going to move on to the actual logistics of how you create and draw and design your landscape. So begin to create a picture in your mind of what you want to achieve. And this is going to change as you move through this process. So be flexible. If you're set on having something in one spot and it's just not working and it's really causing all kinds of other problems, then it might be time to rethink where that item needs to go. So the things that you'll need for your landscape design are multiple scale copies of your garden layout and analysis that you did based on what we did last week. You'll also need an architectural or an engineering scale. You'll need tracing paper, pencil and eraser, pens and thick black Sharpie, a thin black Sharpie, and fine line pens, and then multicolored markers or pencils. And you can buy really nice markers, but I have a box of colored Crayola markers that I bought for my grandchildren that works just fine. And if you're going to use colored pencils, which most of the drawings that you're going to see from here on out were done with Prismacolors, which are these pencils here. And you can get those, you can buy those online. So the first thing you want to do is create a bubble diagram to establish relationships and connections between different elements. Now, I showed you this last time as just the original survey of this property. And so you can see it's a very long, narrow lot. And what I've done is determine where the gardens are going to be, where the front entry is, and where the wild areas are. And you can see that most of this site has been left as wild areas. Here, here, and all back here. The whole back part of this site is wild. And I have done no gardening or upgrades in that area, in those areas. This is a utility area here. There's a storage building here, and this is where we've added rainwater storage tanks. There are two 2,500 gallon tanks here, and they're connected underground to the rainwater collection that comes off the roof of the house, of this side of the house, and the piping goes across here. This is the front gate. So you come in the front gate, and as I mentioned before, you cannot see the front door when you enter the site. So when a visitor gets to this point, they don't know whether to go this direction or that direction. So I tried to create a garden space, and this is where we're going to focus today, is on this garden space that pulls them forward and welcomes them into the site. I also have a garden here. There's a greenhouse here. This year we've added on and doubled the size of the greenhouse, but there's a garden around that greenhouse. And there is the picture of the dry creek that I showed you earlier with the limestone rocks is here, running along the driveway. And there's a water detention area for during deluges that I'm in the process of building a berm around this to create an area that holds water for a day or so after a big rain. This is the play area for the grandchildren and the garden along this dry creek bed. This is my vegetable garden and just garden compost. And this is what I call the entry garden. So I'm going to blow up this area right here, and this is where we're going to focus. So this is that area around the house, and I showed you this last week at the end of the seminar. I broke down the different garden beds for the sun beds, which are the yellow ones, the shade beds. This kind of became the area that I wanted to be my Zen garden because my bedroom window looks out onto this space. This is the dry creek area, and I wanted this to look very native and natural. So it's in the hydrozone where there's a medium use of water. The plants that once they're established here don't need additional water. This is the play area. There's a shade garden here, a berm that we created to sort of define the area, the play area, and separate it from the wild area. That is screening around the propane tank. And then I've created pathways that I want to use, places where I want people to be able to walk and connect in the garden. So this is the hardscaping plan that I did of the bed right around the house in the front and on this end. Because this is what I determined that I was going to do in the first phase of my project. This is phase 2. This is like phase 4 over here. But this was the first garden that we did. So I used the limestone boulders that were lining the driveway when I came to this site and relocated some of them to create interest within this bed where we built up a small berm to create a little bit of enclosure for this area. So when you drive into the site, this is where you come. This garden, or this is the foundation of the garden. You know, all of the hardscaping creates the form of the garden and the foundation of the garden, so that even when things are dormant or completely frozen like they are right now, and most of the plants are gone or damaged and dormant right now, there's still structure to this garden. Somebody who drives in from the front of the site can stop here, and they look and they say, oh, I'm being asked to come up this pathway over these pavers to the front door. You walk past a seating area that's under this large tree that's right outside the front door. There's a piece of sculpture here There are colored pots along the way. There's a blue pot here, and to mark this area as special, this is the one place on the site where I've used other colored pots. There's an orange pot and a lime green pot and a purple pot in this area. There's also a red pot here. So these sort of pull your eye in to this area. The pavers are laid in an interesting pattern. At the door, I did a kind of a radial pattern to sort of create the emphasis. When we had to add a step here because the grade, once we did some of the demolition work, we realized that the grade was off here and we needed to add another step. So I've laid out the beds and the paths. This garden, you can pretty much see it all at once because I really wanted you to be able to find the front door, but there are other spaces in the garden that you can't, and that there are things that draw you towards those areas. Locate new structures. So this wasn't part of the garden, but it happened at the same time. We decided we needed more space on the second floor. And so we added this area on the second floor, and these are the columns that support it. And it created a covered area outside where I have my potting bench. And so this is kind of a little protected area where I store some of my tools and my potting bench. We also added a rainwater collection urn that I've showed you the pictures of. It collects water off of that new roof that we added when we were doing this garden. So that's the hardscaping, and that, as I said, is the basis for your garden and will give your garden structure even when the plants are dormant. So here's the plant layout. So I recommend that you lay out the plants using a scale to help determine how many of each type of plant will be required. And I wouldn't start with the size that they are when you put them in the ground. I would start with a mature size. For example, the Mexican honeysuckle that I'm showing here, I put it in as 4-inch plants. So in the beginning, they're not anywhere near that size. I'm showing the mature size of the plant. And I tried to plant in layers. So I have the taller plants in the back, shorter plants, these are aloes in the front. I used plumbago here and then aloes here to sort of echo the aloes here, and plant for all 4 seasons because there are times when a lot of the things that are in this garden will be dormant. So I planted things that would be green all year round. There are some agaves in here. There's a squid agave. There's some dicheas. The flax lilies normally stay green all year round. They haven't this year. At least in my garden they have. The plumbago normally stays green all year, not this year. Purple coneflower. Here we have, and this part of the garden is in the shade. This is all shade here. So I tried to use plants that would do well in the shade. I have found that even in full shade, most things will do okay. They don't bloom as well. Some things get really leggy and tall, but they'll still do okay in the shade if they get watered. This is also a high water use zone all around here. So because I really want this garden to look nice most of the time, even in the heat of summer. But even in the heat of summer, it only gets watered every 5 days with a minimum amount of water. I needed something tall here at the corner of the house, and this native shrub just sort of planted itself there, and I left it because it was doing exactly what I wanted it to do. You'll see it in some of the photographs. It's tall. It's probably 10 to 11 feet tall. which is exactly what I wanted there. And then all of these plants that are in this area have to be able to withstand intense sun, because this is really the only spot on the site that the sun is really intense. So there's inland sea oats, white plumbago, pink skullcap, aloes, as I mentioned, red yuccas, yellow lantana, purple coneflower, although the purple coneflower is no longer there because the deer have moved in. And as I mentioned, this is a high water zone, so that's consideration for the hydro zone. This is my vegetable garden, so it's also a high water zone, an even higher water zone because it gets watered several times a week. And I did plant inside the fence here a climbing rose to because it's the only place that the deer can't get to it. Over here in this garden, this is a moderate water zone. It gets watered once every 2 weeks or so, and very minimally. So there are native plants growing along the drive here on this side. And as I was doing all of this, I kept in mind these ideas, these design principles, as I developed the garden. So this is a photograph of the garden as it looked last year. And we're going to talk about how the process of doing that. So are there any questions?
Actually, let's wait on that, Sandy. Let's take a quick break, everybody. 3 minutes. We'll take a 3-minute break so Sandy can switch gears and get her breath. We'll start back promptly at 10:50, and Sandy will answer questions. We've got a few in the Q&A, but if you have one, type it in the Q&A. We'll see you back here in 3 minutes. All right, everyone, welcome back. We do have quite a few questions, Sandy, so I'll dig right in. First, someone asks, are there particular foliage plants or flower colors that work better for sun or shade?
Well, I think you can use any color anywhere you want to, but I have found that since mine is a shade garden, I have found that lighter colors like the yellows and whites work better in a shade garden. The purples, blues tend to kind of disappear in shade. So, you know, and it's hard to get reds that do well in shade, although I do have an amaryllis that seems to be just fine in shade. Sun, anything goes. If it can withstand the sun, yeah, I'd use any color that you want to use.
I love that advice on the color wheel, and I'll jump in with just a little bit of horticultural advice. And that is to say that shade plants are normally darker green leaved. And that's because they have to have more chlorophyll to harvest the sun. They don't get as much sun, so they need more chlorophyll to photosynthesize, so their leaves are darker. So if you think about sun versus shade, I think of a hosta plant versus a corn, and a corn plant that grows in full sun has a very pale green leaf. That's horticultural, not color wheel. So I think we both tackled that question from both sides of that coin. All right, next question. What do you recommend for possible plants and design around utility lines and boxes?
I would recommend an evergreen shrubs. I don't have a particular one in mind, but something that would stay green all year round. It will depend on what it is. There are some boxes that that need to be gotten into regularly by the utility company, so you'll have to plant them far enough away that people can still gain access to those boxes. But something that's evergreen that kind of hides the box and gets to a height tall enough to hide the box would be what I would recommend.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would say I see a lot of plants, shrubs planted way too close to those utility boxes. And then they require a lot of maintenance, pruning to keep them to an acceptable distance for the utility company. So just be sure, as always, my recommendation is to look at those mature heights and widths before you plant anything. All right, next question. If you have a basic concrete sidewalk to the house, is there a way to pretty it up? For example, could you put crushed granite on top of the sidewalk and then stepping stones? I've never thought of it that way. That's interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either, but if you have enough height to be able to build it up, you could do that. You could mortar pavers on top of it. You could install them like you would tile inside. If you have a paver that you like, you can install it and then mortar it in place over the sidewalk. If you just want to maybe make the sidewalk a little bit wider, you could edge it with brick or a paver to add a decorative edge to it. There are lots and lots of books out there that have all different kinds of suggestions for paths. And Pinterest, I think it's Pinterest, has a whole section, which I actually look at once in a while, on just paths and walkways and how to make them feel special. So lots and lots of good ideas out there for dealing with concrete walks.
And I'd say what I would add was to be conscious of safety. So putting something on top of a sidewalk, you would need to really make sure that you had the edges bound. If that was a loose gravel or anything that was going to be loose that wouldn't be safe to walk on. So just to be concerned with safety.
Right, that is critical. You don't want somebody slipping and falling or tripping because it's uneven.
All right, next question. What can I use to measure sun and shade in my garden so I know what plants to use? Is there a tool that you use to measure sun and shade in your garden?
I observe it. I don't have an actual tool. I mean, if I draw the trees and I draw the tree canopy, you can kind of estimate where the canopy is going to be, but the best way to do that, or where the shade is going to be, the best way to do that is just to look at your site at different times of the day and different times of the year, because it changes depending on the angle of the sun and how much vegetation there is on the trees. With live oaks, it pretty much stays the same all year round, but if you have cedar elms, they lose their leaves in the winter, and so there's more sun in those areas during the winter time than there is during the summer, which for some plants is just fine. They don't like the hot summer sun, but they can tolerate the winter sun. So for me, it's observation, just watching and looking, and then documenting it at different times by putting it down on a piece of paper, like I did in that one slide I showed where the sun areas were.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that, you could measure the sun with a light meter. I haven't used one since grad school. I'm sure they're still out there, light meters, but that would be a moment in time. And like Sandy says, it's more important for you to go out and feel the sun and how it moves through your landscape all year round and season to season than it would to have a moment in time snapshot of the light in that area. My next question.
Oh, I was just going to say, one thing about sunlight in Texas is that if it's full sun, it's very intense. It's going to be way more than your light meter may be able to measure.
Very good point. Next question. What type of gravel are you using in your landscape?
I like to use granite. It's got what you're seeing in this photograph on this here is it's about a 1-inch granite granite gravel, but it's got sharp edges on it. And that gravel has been installed, because it's confined on the edges, it's been installed 15 years now, and it's all still pretty much in place. It doesn't move much because it kind of locks together. So I like that because it stays put and it doesn't travel around too much. It will a little, but not like, round gravel, like pea gravel. It stays in the spot once you put it there, as long as it's confined on the edges.
Good advice. So speaking of confining, what materials do you recommend for defining walkways and edges and keeping them confined?
Um, I like to use metal edging, heavy duty metal edging. As you can see in the photographs, I use a combination of limestone boulders and metal edging throughout the garden. It gives you a sharp, metal edging gives you a sharp, clean edge. It's easy to bend it and shape it the way you want it to go. And it's durable, long lasting, and it stays where you put it normally. Boulders are great. You can use bricks. I've used bricks. I've used um, pavers. Any kind of material that defines the edge is fine.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. It's kind of just playing around and seeing what works utility wise, and then also what agrees with your aesthetic and matches maybe the stone that you're using. And also consider your budget. So just whatever will do the job. One thing I don't really recommend using are the landscape timbers. They tend to bow over time and make more work down the road. What would you say to that, Sandy?
I totally agree with that. They're not worth the trouble.
Yeah, they're great in the beginning because they're easy to install, but a few years down the road, they're more challenging, I found. Learned that the hard way.
Yeah, one thing that we have done is we have a lot of cedar trees on our site, and a lot of them we have a lot of branches that are like 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and what we've done is cut those into individual lengths, and we use those kind of to create a border around one of our berms, but we pound them into the ground vertically, and so they stay put. They're locked in with each other. I don't have a photograph of that, unfortunately, but it was a really nice detail, and we combined that with limestone rocks, and it really made a nice detail. So just another idea.
Yeah, all kinds of ideas out there. So don't be afraid to play around and try different things in your own landscapes.
Right.
All right, next question. What would be the best method for creating plant beds around the house? Is this something that should be farmed out to a contractor? So creating beds around the house. I assume that she means around the foundation or kind of close to the house.
Right. Not necessarily. If you're up for it, there's no reason that you can't do it yourself. If it's more work than you want to do, then of course get a contractor. If the soil is good and just needs to be amended, 2 or 3 inches of compost added to it really will do in a lot of areas. It's going to depend on where you are in town, how much soil you have. If you need to add soil, you just need to be careful that you don't get it too high on the foundation. If you have a pier and beam house, you really want to stay away from the skirting around the perimeter of the building and not get it too high, because that can contribute to termites infiltration if you get it too high and too close to the foundation. So you need to be careful about that. But if you have a concrete slab, and as you can see here, this is pretty high off the ground. So, I had room to work here and add soil in that bed so that I could amend the soil easily. And the other thing you have to consider is if you have mature trees, you don't want to add more than 3 to 4 inches of soil within the drip line of the tree. And the drip line is the outer edge of the tree, where the canopy is, how far out it extends. You want to be really careful with that so that you don't kill the roots of the tree by doing that.
Yeah, I see that tree looks like it was native to the site before the house was built in front of the house there. Yeah, right. I'd say that's key, is knowing where your foundation is. I also have a pretty high foundation. My backyard is much lower than my front. And so in the back, I have a lot more foundation to where I could build things closer to the house than I can in the front necessarily, or the sides. And so that cement area, it's okay to build a bed right up against that. You're not causing any issues for potential termites. But if it's not foundation, if it's siding or your actual house in any way, you don't want to have soil against that. And so as far as getting a contractor to do it, it's all about just getting the area level and then bounding it in some way. So I think it also depends on the height that you're trying to build. If it's a very tall bed you need to build to compensate for some slope or something, you might use those bricks that you can stack easily to make retaining walls with. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do it if you feel up to it. It just is all what you're willing to do. All right, Sandy, I think we're ready to hop back in. We've got a few questions left, but we'll save those to the end and we'll let you take it away again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Daphne. Okay. Oops, hold on here. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to move into implementation and construction. And first, you need to prepare. You need to get all of your ducks in a row, as they say. So you create a materials list for all the items that you're going to need for the project. And believe me, you're not going to get everything on the list that you are going to need, but it's really good to do this so that you don't spend a lot of time going back and forth to the store during construction. So create a materials list and determine how much of each material is needed. Boulders and rocks are sold by the ton. So if you want to add some boulders to your yard, then you'll need to go to the yards that sell boulders and pick out the boulders you want, and then they will weigh them for you. They're heavier than you think, so that's a fairly expensive purchase for those. Rocks are sold by the ton, so if you want to buy, say, large river rock for a creek bed, those are also sold by the ton, and you can give them the area that you want to cover and how deep, and they can calculate for you by the ton. There's also a chart in the Master Gardener book that gives you some of the rules, the drought to deluge books that gives you formulas for calculating mulch and soil and ordering bricks and rocks and things. Pavers, bricks, and flagstones. Bricks and pavers are sold by the unit. So if you just calculate your area and the size of each one, you can figure out how many you're going to need. And if you're not comfortable doing that, then you can have the supplier help you with your calculations. I would always get extra because things change in the field and you never quite know what you're going to need exactly, no matter how carefully you've drawn it. You could end up needing more pavers than you think you're going to. I ran into an issue with the pavers that I selected for this first project that I'm going to show you, and that I didn't have quite enough of them, and I purchased them at Home Depot, and when I went back, they didn't have any more of them. So I had to come up with a different plan of what to do there. Flagstone is also sold by the ton, and according to the Master Gardener book, a ton of flagstone will cover approximately 70 to 80 square feet. How much? And again, I would order a little bit extra so that you can be sure that you have enough, because it's better to have extra and not run out. Edging, generally metal edging comes in 10-foot strips, and you can just determine, you can measure the edges of your beds and figure out how much you need for that. Order your irrigation parts and pieces. Depending on what kind of irrigation you're going to do. All I do is drip irrigation here because we have very limited water resources, and so I have to be extremely careful with my water. So everything is drip irrigation. Then mulch, compost, soil, and sand are also by the yard. So you calculate the area and depth of each. So for example, if you have, say, a 40 by 50 foot area that you want to cover with 3 inches of compost, you convert all of those. Be sure you calculate the feet, the inches to feet. So 3 inches is 0.25 feet. So when you calculate that and multiply all of those together, you come up with 500 cubic feet that you'll need of that material. Since it's sold by the yard, then you have to divide it by 27 to get cubic yards. So if you don't want to do all of that, um, they can help you. The supplier can also help you with that. And then you want to do a plant list, include the size and number of plants needed. And of course, you're going to have some plants that you decide you want and then you can't get them. They're not available. So you have to make substitutions, but just have a plan. The other thing you want to do is create a time schedule or a timeline to give yourself a reasonable amount of time, and then double it, because I can promise it always takes longer than you think it's going to. Now, this schedule that I'm showing you is for starting a project and ending it and not doing anything else in the meantime. This is like, 8-hour days every day with multiple people working on it, except for this part, gathering of materials. I usually start this 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, where I start gathering my materials and ordering my materials. I could continue that on into the beginning of the construction. This is the number of days. So this project took 15 days, with 2 to 3 people working on it all the time. And then construction starts here. So construction itself actually took 8 days, 8 or 9 days. So on the first day that we started construction, we were still actually gathering some of the materials. You can start doing your demolition while you're still gathering materials, removing any sod that you need to remove. In our case, we had to remove a bunch of mulch. We had a few plants to dig up. We had some things that we had to move out of the way, like sculptures and things like that we had to get out of the way. But there really wasn't a lot of demolition on our project. So this can take longer if you have a structure that you have to tear down, like an old gazebo or an old trellis or something like that that's in the way, or a storage building that you want to relocate or move. That takes more time. And then you want to do your layout. And I'll talk about that more, how you do your layout before you begin construction, so that you take your paper that you've done with your drawing of your hardscape plan, and you use it to lay out the beds on the site. And you're going to be adjusting as you do that. Then there's preparation of base for walks. If you have heavy clay soil, and it's deep heavy clay soil, you're probably going to need to dig some of it out so that you have room to put in a sand bed under your pavers. Where we are is just a small layer of clay over caliche and limestone. So we didn't, and there was a large tree in that area, so we didn't want to do much digging out. So what we did is just prep the base for the walks and smooth it and level it. And then the installation of the edging, pavers, and granite gravel took a couple of days. We had to add an additional concrete step to deal with the elevation change, which I'll talk about more. And that took 3 days from beginning to end, setting the formwork, mixing and placing the concrete, and then removing the formwork on the 3rd day. You want to install your main irrigation lines as you're doing the installation of the pavers and the granites, especially if you have lines going under sidewalks, because you want to put those in before you do your pavers so that you don't have to take them up again. Then a couple of days to install compost, and you're prepping your planting beds, and then 3 days of planting, mulching, and installation of your drippers for your drip irrigation and cleanup. So as I said, this is a really tight schedule. If you're working on the weekends, it's going to look very different from this, but that's kind of the process that you use when you're doing a schedule. And again, it's really important, especially if you have a deadline. If you're going to be on a garden tour, for example, and you want to do something special for it, and you really need to plan so that you can be sure you're done. So, gathering your materials. Um, you know, you can order all of these materials, all of the materials to be delivered, which gets kind of expensive. If you have a truck or a trailer, you can pick a lot of it up yourself. Um, if you gather the materials yourself, you're going to be buying compost a lot of times in bags and mulch in bags. Or if you have it delivered, this is the gravel and the topsoil that we had added. Those were delivered on site by dump trucks. Um, the stone, you can get it palletized like this is, or you they'll just bring it out in a dump truck and dump it out somewhere, depending on how you order it and what it is. I like to buy my pots and any decorative items that I'm going to be using, um, so that I have them on site so that I can place them and begin to look at them inside in situ and make sure that they're where I want them to be. And I sometimes, if the project's going to take more than a week or so, I hold off on getting the plants until I'm almost ready to install. Typically, we do these big projects in February and early March, sometimes the end of January, and very often not all the plants are in stock yet. So I have to wait until they do come in. And as I said before, gather as much of the material as you can before you begin, so minimize trips to pick up missing items. Um, so demolition, get rid of any hardscaping structures, plants that you aren't going to keep, and remove items and plants that you want to relocate to other parts of the garden. So this is the beginning of construction, and this is my crew. Um, we have done multiple projects here on this site together. Anita is my college roommate. We've known each other over 50 years and have been great friends. We're both gardeners. She lives in Denver, Colorado. And when she can't garden in Denver, she comes to Austin to help me. Um, and then this is my partner, Joe. This is him here and here. And this is a project we did in the Welcome Garden where we had a bunch of large boulders that we installed and put in place. And you can see we did all the work ourselves. This is our friend Mark. He came for that project. Um, he lives in Nacogdoches and he came and worked with us for that project. He drove our skid steer. That was the one time we rented equipment to do a project, was for these large boulders and moving a lot of soil around. And then we have our supervisor, Pia. She supervises every single garden project that we do. She is my gardening buddy. They're a great team, and we've done 7 or 8 projects together. And it's sort of an interlude in all of our lives for us to get together and do this. So I'm really lucky to have this team. So you've seen these photographs before. This is the entry garden before we started construction in 2006. As you can see, it's pretty bare. It's a lovely site with these large mature trees. Um, and then the area around the house. My partner, Joe, is not a gardener. He's a great carpenter and man of all trades, but he's not a gardener. So when I came to live here, he had not done any gardening. What we have around the house is a thick layer of mulch, all these limestone boulders that are sort of placed along the edge of the drive, these rusted metal sculptures that he did, um, that were part of his landscaping, and a few plants scattered here and there. But pretty barren site. Not a lot here other than the big trees. Um, so when we did the plan, we and I had it ready to go. Anita came. We started with defining the edges of the beds, and you can see we've already gathered pots that we're going to be using and sort of place them where we think they're going to be. So lay out the beds and set the edging for the walkway. And you can see the garden hose here that we used to set the edging so that we could create the curves with the edging, and then also place the limestone boulders here in this bed. Um, if you're doing straight paths, or decks and patios, you can lay it out with string lines. There's a great book that I put on your resource list that shows step-by-step process how to do that, and can describe it much better than I can. Um, okay, so hardscaping, installing the pavers. Um, use a level or laser beam to make sure that the paving is smooth and flat. And for drainage, you build in a 1/4-inch slope. And install your sleeves for your irrigation lines. You can see these photographs here where they were installed um, prior to us beginning really doing work. Um, so you can see here the edges have been set on the metal edging has been set and the boulders have been set in place. And I'm beginning to lay out the pavers and how I want them to look on the site. Here we're beginning the construction of the adding the concrete step to the porch. So level and smooth the subgrade. And as I said before, if you've got deep, heavy clay soil, you're going to have to dig some of the topsoil out, or you're going to have a problem with heaving. And you add a 2 to 4 inch sand bed underneath your pavers. And if your soil is heavy clay, it may need to be even thicker. Install and level the pavers. Here you can see the pavers have just been set. They're not set down in the gravel. And I made the mistake of adding the gravel and then trying to set the pavers on this project. I learned the hard way that that's not the way that you should do it. So it's much easier to set the pavers in sand and go ahead and add your granite, gravel or granite on top of it. And if you decide to do a solid surface of pavers, you just fill the joints with sand. This is probably the most tedious task in the project, but it also is one of the most rewarding because it does create a pathway that it's pervious, it allows water in, but it also is of solid surface that people can walk on easily. And you'll see in some of the later pictures that the pavers have settled down into the gravel and they're almost level. So it's really almost a level walking surface. Here are the pavers at the porch, and you can see how they're set in a pattern to radiate out. This is the additional step that we added. When we got all of the mulch dug out, we realized that this first step was too high. And so we had to go back and add another step. And fortunately, we had a friend who was an incredible concrete mason, and he was able to match the original red concrete pretty darn close. And after 15 years, you can't tell that this step was added later from the rest of it. So you have to adjust to your site conditions. I pretty much knew once I got the mulch dug out that we were going to have to add the step because you want to create safe pathways. Steps should be a maximum of 7 inches high and a minimum of 6 inches tall. Any higher than that, and people who are older or have trouble with their knees have a hard time climbing them. Anything less than 6 inches can often be difficult for older people to see, and they can trip. So that's minimum 6 to 7 inches is really a good height. Your treads, which is the level surface of a step, should be at least 12 inches wide. And landings at doors should be at least 4 feet deep and 4 to 5 feet wide. You want to have maneuvering room on the side of a door so that somebody who has their hands full or needs to shift to one side to use the other hand to open the door can do that. That does not meet handicap code, but for residential, you don't have to do that. And I would recommend that you make your paths a minimum of 3 feet wide. That allows two people who are really close to walk side by side. If you want pathways to, and 4 feet wide is even better if you have the room for that. So we began to install. As you can see, the pavers are still not set here, but they're in place. And Anita was going to have to go home, and so she moved forward with the planting beds as I began to set pavers. And you can see her in these photographs here. She did a yeoman's job of installing this topsoil. We added topsoil here to create a low berm to create that sense of enclosure that I mentioned, and the stones. And then she began planting the plants that we were able to find while she was still here. I had to go back and add a lot more plants later from what you can see here, but that was what was available in February that year. You know, we installed the main lines of the irrigation, and then as we set the plants, we began planting everything and beginning to bring the garden up to its final form. So here she is planting. And this is the final day that she was here. We were able to get a lot of the planting done, but as you can see, we're still missing plants here in the sun area. And we don't have plants in all of the pots. So once we planted, and after she left, I installed irrigators to every single plant and hooked up the irrigation system. I've installed all of the irrigation myself because I use drip irrigation and bought all the pieces at Home Depot. I bought a fishing tackle box that has all the little divided compartments in it, and I put all of the different pieces in different parts, and I've learned which ones I use most often, so I have the most of those, and I've just separated them into my fishing tackle box. And I also have, you can buy the 1/2-inch tubing and all the fittings for that, and the fittings for the 1/4-inch tubing, and you can buy the tubing in, I think, in 50-foot rolls and 100-foot rolls. And I always use more than I think I'm going to, so I usually buy a 100-foot roll of tubing and a 100-foot roll of the shorter tubing. And I found that you need to make your shorter runs probably at least 1 foot to 1.5 feet long, so that as plants grow and move or die and you have to put in something new, you can move the dripper without having to completely redo it. And so once you're finished, you mulch everything and water and clean up. And so there's pictures of the before garden, and as I said, this is what it looked like 10 years later, where it's begun to fill in and grow beautifully. And so, we have any questions?
We do have a few more questions. Thank you so much, Sandy. I just want to thank you before we move into those questions. Truly helpful information. Like many horticulturists, I'm a scientist and a gardener with no design sense. So I truly appreciate you lining out so clearly how you laid out those garden paths, because that's something that I'm trying to tackle right now in my own landscape. And I'm particularly also challenged with the color wheel concepts. Like many people, I'll go to the garden center and bring home a plant on impulse, and then it just doesn't go with my landscape. So it's really great to think about those concepts of design that all of us kind of put aside before we just jump right into our landscape. So thank you so much for your expertise today. All right, let's jump into these last couple of questions. And if you have a question, type it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it. All right, so do you have to compact the area before installing pavers or other hardscapes? I don't want to rent equipment, the person says.
You can, yeah. I mean, if you don't have hard pack like we had, it's a really good idea to compact. You can buy a hand compact tool. It's just basically a handle with a flat, about a 1 foot flat square piece of metal attached to it that's heavy that you
A
can use.
tamper? I would
Yeah,
call
it's
that
a
a tamper. And
tamper.
I own one. And when I bought it, I thought, oh, this is an indulgence. I need it for this one project. I use it all the time. Indispensable tool.
Right. It's very handy to have. We have one of them. It's almost too heavy for me to lift. My partner Joe likes to buy the heavy duty of everything, and so it's almost too much for me. But I can do it myself. So yeah, I would recommend tamping your soil if you have, if you're going to put in pavers, if you have heavy clay. It's really critical. Like I said, ours was very hard packed already. There would have been nothing that we could have done to make it any harder.
So since I am dealing with this, I'll just throw in my 2 cents from my experience. I have a little bit of clay in my soil, which is very helpful. So what I found that I have to do is when I'm kind of moving around and building beds, I'll keep some of my soil that I've taken away from the area where I'm going to put in maybe some compost or build the bed up. I save that soil, which has just enough clay in it to be helpful if I need to build up the grade in another area. So I have little piles of soil. I also learned very early on not to toss out any rocks that I dig up in my landscape, because those have come in helpful later on. But even just a little bit of clay really helps when you're trying to get soil to pack down. If you have heavy
Right.
clay soil, you can kind of mix it with some compost or some sand to make it less compacty if you're trying to kind of contour it a little bit. But yet really does need to be leveled and flattened. You can do that with paver base. I saw that you had paver base in some of your slides. That's helpful. There are lots of different ways to do that for sure.
Right. Yeah. All of those things are really good advice. So I really recommend that you do that.
Next question, currently looks like our final question. So we still have time on the schedule. If you have a question, type it in. For the project you've been describing, what would be the approximate cost, DIY versus hiring a contractor to do all of that work? Very good question. I'm curious as well.
I don't know if I can tell you the answer for sure. I can give you a wild guess. I think probably the total cost on the project, plants, irrigation, pavers, gravel, dirt, all the materials, I would say I probably spent $1,200 to $1,500 with us doing it ourselves. I had lots of free labor, so it was that was probably what it cost. I would say that it would easily be $7,000 to $8,000 with contractor. I don't
I
know.
think it would be more.
Do you think it would be more than that?
Yeah, and so I'll weigh in again just with personal experience. When I first moved into my house, it's a brand new house, so it had no landscaping, had 2 trees in the front, no trees in the back, all turf. And I've tried to tackle a little at a time. But in the early days, I was optimistic and thought I might be able to hire someone, and had someone come out to give me an estimate. And it was $12,000 just to build the beds and the hardscaping. And I don't have near the size property that you have. So I very quickly decided that I would have to pay for it myself in my own time, rather than out of my pocketbook, because I couldn't afford to do that. So it's very pricey to hire a contractor. And I would say if you do have the money to hire a contractor, be sure that you get multiple bids and that you ask around and get recommendations of people, because as we
Daphne, you're muted.
people that are in business for themselves, you really need to do a business check on them to make sure that they're not fly by night, that they have some experience, and just with everything, just be careful with who you hire, obviously.
Right. Yes, that's really important. I had no experience doing that because we've done all of the landscaping in this yard ourselves because we love doing it, and not everybody does. So,
Yeah, we had a person who type in that they just had a similar size property to you, and they had a contractor come out and do an estimate, and it was $30,000. So yeah.
wow.
Yeah. All right, we had a couple more questions come in. Let's see what we've got here. Do you keep this area clean when the leaves fall?
Yeah, I mostly rake them and then get most of them up because believe me, when the oak leaves fall, it's slippery. You have to keep them cleaned up. So I I rake them up, the majority of them, and pile them somewhere on the site. And then I use a blower, which I hate, but I use a blower to clear it out so that they don't build up and in the beds and stuff and on the walk. So yes, I have to regularly clean it out. The dry creek bed, which you can kind of see barely in the background, it really fills up with leaves, and so that takes a lot of work to get all of it out of there. Um, but it's worth it, you know.
Yeah. Uh, Here's another good one, and I'm going to weigh in after you give your answer as well. What plants do you recommend to plant under live oaks, considering shade and toxins? I think maybe he means the soil roots chemicals that they exude, but that's not an issue with live oaks. But
Right. I have had a great deal of luck with Mexican honeysuckle, uh, Turk's cap, plumbago, um, flax lilies, um, different salvias, uh, bone set. I can't remember there's another term for that that other people call it. But a lot of natives, uh, different sages and salvias do really well. Aloes, lots of different aloes. You can see these aloes in this photograph. Whoops, where's my cursor? Where'd it go? There it is. These aloes, they're blooming in this picture, but they have done really, really well. There were just a few of them under that tree when I moved in, and now it's a huge bed of them. Um, and things in pots that I like to put in the shade are daikias and some of the smaller agaves like squid agave. So that's there are more, but those are the main ones I'm thinking of that do really well, and I don't have to worry about them. Oh, shrimp plant is another one that does really well, and I have all different colors of that. So
those are all great plants to try. I would just say definitely steer clear of being near the trunk. I think too many people want to build, what I've seen in my neighborhood especially, is that people want to build a bed, a brick and mortar bed, maybe even, and build up the soil to make a bed. So if you're planting anything under your trees, don't do that. You don't want to build up the soil and build a bed. It would need to be at ground level so that you don't interfere with the roots or get next to the trunk of that tree. And yes, what most landscapes have to start is grass or turf with a tree planted in it. So if you buy a home where a tree has been planted and you have turf around it, then you're going to have a hard time keeping that turf alive. But heavier shade plants, as long as you can aerate the soil. So if you're like me and you had turf around your tree to start with, and now that turf is starting to die back because it's getting too shady, the soil is also compacting in that area. So in order to then put in plants around that tree, you'll need to do some aeration of the soil and maybe add some compost to those aerated areas so you could get the soil improved a little bit and get some plants to grow there. But definitely do not build up the bed and do not plant close to the trunk.
right, you don't want to change the elevation around a tree, particularly at the trunk. You want to stay away from it. Even with the mulch, you need to keep the mulch away from the base of the tree, 3 to 6 inches, and you don't want to build up more than 3 inches in the critical root zone, which is the first 25 feet out from the tree.
Yes. All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. We'll follow up individually with any questions that we didn't get answered. Thank you, Sandy, for a wonderful presentation. I appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us today and all the personal details that you shared. And thank you to our attendees for participating. Very soon, you'll receive an extensive email from us, including a link to a short survey. We'd really appreciate it if you'd fill that out. It's very valuable to us, and that feedback helps to ensure that Extension can continue to offer programs like this. The email will also include a link to access the recording of today's session, a list of resources for further study, and links to any websites or source material listed by the speaker, along with information on how to contact our gardening helpline and how to subscribe to notifications for future seminars and our Drought to Deluge series, as well as other AgriLife Extension programs on horticulture and gardening. Until next time, thank you for joining us and happy gardening.
Thank you, everyone.